The morning mist hung thick over the Mekong River as Captain Marcus Chen adjusted his radio headset. His unit had been tracking rebel forces through the dense jungle for 3 days, following intelligence reports of weapon smuggling operations along the water routes. The oppressive heat made every movement feel sluggish, and the humidity turned their uniforms into uncomfortable second skins. "Delta Team, report your position," Marcus whispered into his microphone, crouching behind a fallen log that provided perfect cover overlooking the riverbank. His sniper rifle, a precision instrument he had relied on for 7 years of military service, rested steady against the rotting wood. "Delta Team in position. 2 clicks downstream," came the crackling response from Sergeant Riley Thompson, his most trusted companion through 2 tours of duty. "We have eyes on 3 boats moving upstream. Looks like our intel was correct." Marcus studied the murky water through his scope. The early morning light created dancing shadows on the surface, making it difficult to distinguish between floating debris and potential threats. Everything seemed normal for a quiet stretch of river in Southeast Asia, but his instincts told him otherwise. After years of combat experience, he had developed an almost supernatural ability to sense danger before it revealed itself. The mission briefing had been straightforward enough. Intelligence suggested that a notorious arms dealer named Viktor Kozlov was using this remote section of river to transport weapons to rebel groups operating in the region. Kozlov had evaded capture for months, always staying 1 step ahead of military operations. This time, however, they had solid information about his route and timing. "Charlie Team, what's your status?" Marcus called to the 3rd unit positioned on the opposite bank. "Charlie Team ready. No movement detected on our side," reported Lieutenant Sarah Park, a sharpshooter whose accuracy rivaled Marcus's own. "The water looks calm from here." Marcus swept his scope slowly across the riverbank, methodically checking every possible hiding spot. Years of training had taught him to look for the smallest details that others might miss. A displaced rock, an unusual shadow, a patch of vegetation that seemed slightly different from its surroundings. The enemy often revealed themselves through these tiny inconsistencies. The intelligence report indicated that Kozlov would be traveling with a small armed escort, probably no more than 6 men in 2 boats. They were expected to pass through this section of river sometime before noon, taking advantage of the morning fog for cover. Marcus and his teams had arrived before dawn to establish their positions and create an effective crossfire zone. As the minutes ticked by, Marcus found himself thinking about his daughter Emma, who would be celebrating her 8th birthday next week. He had missed her last birthday due to deployment, and he was determined not to miss another one. This mission was supposed to be his last before rotating back home for an extended leave period. Movement downstream. Riley's voice crackled through the radio, immediately snapping Marcus back to full alertness. "I count 2 boats approximately 1 kilometer out. They're moving slowly, staying close to the eastern bank." Marcus adjusted his position slightly and focused his scope downstream. Through the magnification, he could make out 2 dark shapes moving against the current. The boats appeared to be wooden fishing vessels common in this region, but something about their movement pattern seemed deliberate rather than casual. "Confirmed visual on 2 boats," Marcus reported to his command post. "Requesting permission to engage when targets are identified." "Permission granted," came the immediate response. "Rules of engagement are clear. Positive identification required before taking any action." The boats continued their steady progress upstream, and Marcus could now see that each vessel carried 3 occupants. The men were dressed in civilian clothes, but their posture and the way they scanned the shoreline suggested military training. One man in the lead boat held what appeared to be an automatic rifle, though he kept it low and partially concealed. "I have eyes on potential hostiles," Marcus whispered into his radio. 6 men total armed, waiting for positive identification of primary target. Through his scope, Marcus studied the face of each man carefully, comparing them to the photographs he had memorized during the mission briefing. The quality of the images had been poor, taken from surveillance cameras at various border crossings, but Viktor Kozlov had distinctive facial features that should be recognizable even at a distance. The lead boat was now only 300 meters away, well within effective range of Marcus's rifle. He could see the men more clearly now, noting their weapons and equipment. They were definitely not ordinary fishermen. Their gear was too sophisticated, their movements too coordinated. Delta Team, I think I have visual confirmation of the primary target. Riley's voice whispered through the radio. Second boatman in the stern wearing a dark baseball cap. Matches the description from our briefing. Marcus shifted his scope to the second boat and focused on the man Riley had identified. Even through the morning haze, the facial features were unmistakable. Victor Kozlov, the arms dealer they had been hunting for months, was sitting calmly in the back of a wooden fishing boat, probably thinking he was invisible to any surveillance. Confirmed identification of primary target, Marcus reported. All units prepare to engage on my command. The boats were now passing directly through the kill zone that his teams had established. Marcus controlled his breathing, feeling his heartbeat slow as his training took over. This was the moment they had been preparing for, the chance to eliminate a major threat to regional stability. But something felt wrong. The approach was too easy, too predictable. In his experience, dangerous men like Victor Kozlov didn't survive by being careless about their security. There had to be something they weren't seeing, some element of the situation that hadn't been accounted for in their planning. Hold positions, Marcus commanded, his instincts overruling the tactical opportunity. Something doesn't feel right about this. He swept his scope across the entire area again, looking for anything he might have missed. The riverbank appeared empty, the jungle silent except for the normal sounds of wildlife. But the feeling of unease continued to grow stronger, like a warning bell ringing in the back of his mind. Marcus, we have a clear shot. Riley's voice urged through the radio. Target is exposed and within range. Negative, Marcus replied firmly. Maintain positions but do not engage. I need another minute to assess the situation. As he continued scanning the area, Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. On the opposite bank, partially concealed behind a cluster of river reeds, there was a small disturbance in the water that didn't match the natural flow pattern. It was subtle, almost invisible, but his trained eye caught the irregularity. Someone else was in the water, someone who shouldn't be there. And if there was one person they hadn't accounted for, there could be others. The entire operation suddenly felt like it might be walking into a trap rather than springing one. Marcus kept his scope trained on the suspicious disturbance in the water, while his mind raced through possibilities. The morning sun was climbing higher, burning away some of the protective mist that had concealed their positions. Time was working against them now, and every passing minute increased their exposure. Command, this is Bravo Team Leader, Marcus whispered into his radio. I have potential additional hostiles in the water. Request immediate backup and extraction route confirmation. Bravo Team, maintain your position, came the terse reply from headquarters. No additional assets available. Complete your mission as planned. The response didn't surprise Marcus, but it confirmed his worst suspicions. They were on their own in what was rapidly becoming a much more complicated situation than anyone had anticipated. The boats with Victor Kozlov were now directly in front of his position, moving at a steady pace that suggested confidence rather than caution. Through his scope, Marcus watched Kozlov lean forward to speak with the boat pilot. The arms dealer appeared relaxed, almost casual, as if he were taking a pleasant morning cruise rather than smuggling weapons through hostile territory. That level of comfort in a dangerous area meant he either had excellent security arrangements or knew something that Marcus didn't. Riley, sweep your sector again, Marcus commanded. Look for anything that doesn't belong. Water disturbances, unusual shadows, equipment reflections. They may have advanced scouts in position. Already on it, Riley responded. I'm seeing some irregularities about 50 meters upstream from the primary targets. Could be natural debris, but the pattern looks deliberate. Lieutenant Park's voice crackled through from the opposite bank. Charlie Team has movement in the tree line approximately 100 meters north of our position. At least 2 individuals, possibly armed. They're maintaining distance but paralleling the boats. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. What had begun as a straightforward interdiction mission was revealing itself as a complex operation involving multiple unknown players. Marcus realized they were likely walking into a carefully prepared ambush, with his own teams potentially serving as the primary targets. All units, we are compromising the mission, Marcus decided quickly. Prepare for immediate extraction. Something is very wrong here. But before anyone could respond, the water disturbance that Marcus had been watching suddenly resolved into a human figure rising from the riverbank. A sniper in full camouflage emerged from what had appeared to be empty water, his rifle already trained on Marcus's position. The man had been submerged for an unknown amount of time, breathing through a reed, waiting for exactly this moment. "Contact!" Marcus shouted into his radio, while simultaneously rolling away from his previous position. The enemy sniper's first shot cracked through the air, splintering the log where Marcus had been lying just seconds earlier. The jungle exploded into chaos. Automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions along both sides of the river. Marcus's carefully planned ambush had become a deadly trap, with his own teams caught in a crossfire from enemies who had anticipated their every move. "This is Delta Team. We are under heavy fire," Riley's voice shouted through the radio static. Multiple hostiles, well-equipped and positioned. They knew we were coming. Marcus crawled rapidly through the underbrush, seeking better cover while trying to maintain visual contact with the enemy sniper who had emerged from the water. The man was clearly a professional, moving with the fluid efficiency that marked years of combat experience. His equipment was sophisticated, including what appeared to be advanced optical sights and communication gear. "Charlie Team is pinned down," Lieutenant Park reported, her voice tight with stress. "We have at least 4 hostiles on our side of the river, and they have our position zeroed. Requesting immediate support." The boats carrying Viktor Kozlov had increased speed and were rapidly moving out of the engagement area. Marcus realized that the entire scenario had been a setup from the beginning. The arms dealer had used himself as bait to draw them into a predetermined killing zone where his security team could eliminate the pursuing military units. Bullets whined through the vegetation around Marcus as he low-crawled toward a better position. The enemy had excellent fire discipline and coordination, suggesting they were dealing with former military personnel rather than typical criminals. Every movement he made drew immediate and accurate response fire, forcing him to remain essentially motionless. "Bravo team leader to all units," Marcus called through his radio. "This is a planned ambush. Our intelligence was compromised. Execute emergency extraction protocol immediately." The emergency extraction protocol was something they had drilled extensively but hoped never to use. It involved individual teams breaking contact and moving to predetermined rally points, abandoning the mission objective in favor of survival. It was not a decision Marcus made lightly, but the alternative appeared to be the complete destruction of his command. Through a gap in the foliage, Marcus caught sight of the enemy sniper who had emerged from the water. The man was methodically engaging each of his team positions, forcing them to keep their heads down while other hostiles maneuvered for better angles of attack. His precision and timing indicated extensive training and experience in exactly this type of riverine ambush. "I need covering fire to reach the extraction point," Riley's voice called through the radio. "They have my route covered and I can't move without being exposed." Marcus studied the tactical situation through his scope. The enemy had positioned themselves perfectly to control all the natural avenues of escape from the ambush zone. They had clearly studied this terrain extensively and prepared for exactly this scenario. Every piece of cover that his teams might use had been pre-registered for enemy fire. The professional setup suggested that Viktor Kozlov's operation was far more sophisticated than intelligence had indicated. Rather than simply smuggling weapons, he appeared to be running counterintelligence operations designed to eliminate the military units pursuing him. The arms dealing might be secondary to a larger agenda involving the systematic destruction of regional security forces. "Command, this is Bravo Team," Marcus called desperately into his radio. "We are in a prepared ambush site with multiple casualties probable. Request immediate air support and extraction assets." "Negative on air support," came the response. "No assets available in your area. You are ordered to complete the mission and eliminate the primary target." The response confirmed Marcus's growing suspicion that something was fundamentally wrong with this entire operation. No competent commander would order troops to continue a mission under these circumstances without providing adequate support. Either the command structure had been compromised, or there were political considerations that made his teams expendable. A burst of automatic fire stitched across the ground near Marcus's position, forcing him to press himself flat against the earth. The enemy sniper had located his approximate position and was methodically closing the engagement range. In a few more minutes, the man would have a clear shot regardless of what cover Marcus could find. "All units, we are breaking contact now," Marcus ordered. "Move to Rally Point Alpha by individual routes. Do not wait for coordinated movement. This is survival mode." As he began his own movement toward the extraction point, Marcus caught one last glimpse of Viktor Kozlov's boats disappearing around a bend in the river. The arms dealer had orchestrated a perfect ambush, eliminating his pursuers while making his own escape look routine and effortless. It was a level of operational sophistication that suggested connections far beyond simple criminal activity. The enemy sniper fired again, the bullet passing so close to Marcus's head that he felt the shock wave. The man was closing the distance steadily, and Marcus realized that reaching the extraction point would require eliminating this immediate threat first. The mission had failed, but survival was still possible if he could outmaneuver the professional who was hunting him through the jungle. Marcus pressed himself against the muddy ground as another bullet cracked overhead, sending splinters of bark raining down from a tree trunk inches from his position. The enemy sniper was methodically closing the distance, using the chaos of the firefight to mask his own movement while maintaining steady pressure on Marcus's location. The jungle around them had become a deadly maze of crossfire and confusion. Through his radio earpiece, Marcus could hear the desperate communications from his scattered team members, each one fighting their own battle for survival against an enemy that had clearly prepared for this confrontation weeks in advance. Delta Team to any station. Riley's voice crackled through heavy static. I'm hit and can't make the primary extraction point. Moving to alternate rally point Bravo. Heavy bleeding but mobile. Marcus felt his stomach clench with worry for his longtime friend and partner, but he couldn't afford the luxury of concern right now. The enemy sniper had found a new firing position and was systematically eliminating every piece of cover in Marcus's immediate area. The man was forcing him to move, driving him toward some predetermined location where other hostiles were probably waiting. Through a gap in the vegetation, Marcus caught a clearer glimpse of his pursuer. The man was tall and lean, moving with the confident precision of someone who had done this many times before. His equipment was military grade but bore no identifying marks or unit insignia. Most disturbing was the calm, almost casual way he approached what was clearly a job rather than a battle. Charlie Team, what's your status? Marcus whispered into his radio while carefully repositioning to get a better angle on the approaching sniper. Charlie Team has 2 wounded. Lieutenant Park responded, her voice tight with stress. We're surrounded by at least 6 hostiles with automatic weapons. They're not trying to kill us quickly. They're hurting us somewhere specific. The tactical picture that emerged from these reports was deeply troubling. Rather than simply eliminating the military teams, the enemy appeared to be conducting a complex operation designed to capture or control their movements. This suggested objectives beyond mere survival or escape, pointing toward intelligence gathering or psychological warfare purposes. Marcus steadied his rifle against a fallen branch and acquired the enemy sniper in his scope. The man was approximately 200 meters away, moving carefully but confidently through terrain he obviously knew well. Marcus controlled his breathing and began the mental calculations necessary for a precision shot through jungle vegetation. At a moving target, the enemy sniper suddenly stopped and turned directly toward Marcus's position, as if sensing the threat. For a moment, the 2 professionals stared at each other through their respective scopes, each recognizing the skill and experience of his opponent. Then both men fired simultaneously. Marcus felt the enemy's bullet tear through the fabric of his jacket, missing his chest by perhaps 2 inches. His own shot struck the enemy sniper in the upper shoulder, spinning the man around but not dropping him. Instead of falling, the wounded sniper immediately rolled behind cover and disappeared from view. Bravo Team leader to all units, Marcus called into his radio. I have wounded the primary sniper, but he is still mobile and dangerous. All teams continue movement toward extraction points. Do not attempt to rescue wounded unless absolutely safe to do so. The decision to abandon potentially wounded team members went against every instinct Marcus possessed, but tactical reality demanded harsh choices. The enemy had demonstrated superior preparation and positioning, making rescue attempts likely to result in additional casualties without saving the original victims. As Marcus began moving toward his own extraction point, he noticed that the pattern of enemy fire was changing. Rather than maintaining steady pressure on all his team positions, the hostiles appeared to be concentrating their efforts on specific areas while allowing others to remain relatively quiet. This tactical shift suggested they were either running low on ammunition or focusing on particular objectives. Command, this is Bravo Team Leader. Marcus called into his radio. Request immediate intelligence update on the primary target and associated personnel. This is not a simple arms-dealing operation. We are facing organized military resistance with advanced intelligence on our movements and objectives. Bravo team, maintain mission focus, came the terse reply from headquarters. Complete elimination of primary target remains your priority. The response confirmed Marcus's growing certainty that someone at command level was either incompetent or actively working against his teams. No rational commander would continue, insisting on mission completion under these circumstances without providing adequate support or intelligence updates. A burst of automatic fire from his left flank forced Marcus to dive behind a rotting log, pressing his face into the mud as bullets chewed up the vegetation around him. The enemy was conducting coordinated flanking movements, using multiple teams to compress his available maneuvering space while driving him toward some predetermined location. Through the chaos, Marcus heard the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the south. For a moment, his spirits lifted with the possibility of air support or extraction assets finally arriving to assist his beleaguered teams. But as the aircraft came closer, he realized the engine sound was wrong for military helicopters. All stations, we have civilian aircraft approaching the area, Lieutenant Park's voice warned through the radio. Could be enemy extraction or reinforcement. All teams take cover and avoid exposure. The helicopter passed directly over the engagement area at low altitude, and Marcus caught a glimpse of what appeared to be Victor Kozlov himself, leaning out of the passenger compartment, surveying the battle below with obvious satisfaction. The arms dealer was not simply escaping. He was personally overseeing the destruction of the military teams that had been pursuing him. This revelation completely changed Marcus's understanding of what they were facing. Rather than stumbling into an ambush while pursuing a criminal, they had been deliberately lured into a killing ground by someone conducting sophisticated psychological warfare operations. The entire mission had been compromised from the beginning, possibly at the highest levels of command. The wounded enemy sniper had apparently received medical attention and repositioned himself, because bullets began striking near Marcus's location with renewed accuracy and frequency. The man was clearly a professional who wouldn't be deterred by a shoulder wound, and he had probably called in additional support during the brief lull in combat. "This is Delta Team," Riley's voice called weakly through the radio. "I'm at Rally Point Bravo, but there are hostiles already in position here. The extraction points have been compromised. They knew our emergency procedures. The tactical situation had become hopeless. Every contingency plan they possessed had been anticipated and countered by an enemy with access to their operational procedures and communication frequencies." Marcus realized that survival now depended on abandoning all standard protocols and improvising completely new approaches to escape and evasion. As he began moving through the jungle using routes that weren't part of any official training or procedure, Marcus found himself thinking about the bigger picture. Victor Kozlov's operation was clearly much more than arms dealing. They were facing someone with the resources and connections to penetrate military intelligence, compromise command structures, and conduct complex operations against government forces. The implications extended far beyond their immediate survival. If Kozlov could orchestrate this level of deception and violence against experienced military teams, he represented a threat to regional stability that intelligence services had completely underestimated. The question now was whether any of them would survive long enough to report what they had discovered. The jungle fell into an unnatural silence that made Marcus's skin crawl. After 30 minutes of intense gunfire, the sudden quiet felt more threatening than the chaos had been. His experienced instincts warned him that the enemy was either regrouping for a final assault or had achieved their primary objectives and were preparing to withdraw. Marcus remained motionless in his concealed position, listening carefully to the forest sounds around him. Birds had stopped singing, insects had gone quiet, and even the constant background noise of the river seemed muted. This kind of silence usually meant that human predators were moving through the area, their presence disturbing the natural rhythm of wildlife. Through his radio earpiece, Marcus heard the faint whisper of Lieutenant Park's voice. "Charlie team to any station. I have 2 wounded but stable. We're in a defensive position about 500 meters north of the original landing zone. No enemy contact for the past 10 minutes. Delta team responding," came Riley's weak but determined voice. "I'm mobile but losing blood. The extraction points are all compromised. We need to create new rally points using terrain features only. No radio coordinates. Marcus smiled grimly at his friend's tactical thinking. Riley had recognized that their communications were probably being monitored, making any reference to predetermined locations a guarantee of enemy ambush. From now on, they would have to rely on their knowledge of the terrain and each other to coordinate movement without giving away their positions. All stations, this is Bravo team leader, Marcus whispered into his radio. New protocol in effect immediately. Use only terrain references visible from the air. No grid coordinates, no predetermined locations. Think like hunters, not soldiers. The shift in tactics represented a fundamental change in how they approached the situation. Military training emphasized coordination, communication, and standardized procedures. But those same procedures had been compromised, forcing them to rely on more primitive but potentially more effective methods of survival and evasion. Marcus began moving slowly through the underbrush, using techniques his grandfather had taught him during childhood hunting trips, rather than the military movement procedures he had learned in advanced training. The old Lakota methods of moving through hostile territory had kept his ancestors alive for thousands of years, and they might be more effective than modern tactics against an enemy who knew all the military procedures. As he moved, Marcus noticed disturbing signs that the enemy had been in this area for days or possibly weeks before the mission began. There were carefully concealed observation posts, prepared fighting positions, and supply caches that indicated extensive advance planning. The entire operation had been designed specifically to eliminate his teams, with Viktor Kozlov serving as bait to draw them into the killing ground. A slight movement in the vegetation ahead caused Marcus to freeze instantly. Through the dappled shadows, he could see the outline of what appeared to be the wounded enemy sniper, moving carefully along a game trail about 50 meters to his front. The man was favoring his wounded shoulder but still carrying his rifle in a ready position, clearly still hunting for targets. Marcus studied the enemy's movement pattern and realized that the man was not randomly searching the area. He was following a specific route that would intersect with the most likely escape routes from the ambush zone. The sniper was using the same tactical principles that Marcus would have employed, thinking like his quarry to predict their movements and behaviors. The professional recognition between the two snipers created an almost personal duel within the larger conflict. Each man respected the skills of his opponent, while remaining absolutely committed to killing him. It was the kind of focused, deadly competition that could only exist between individuals who understood the requirements and costs of their profession. Marcus waited until the enemy sniper had moved past his position before beginning to follow at a distance. Rather than trying to escape, he had decided to turn predator himself, using his opponent's wounds and predictable behavior patterns to gain an advantage. The injured man would eventually need to rest or seek medical attention, creating opportunities for elimination. Through his radio, Marcus heard sporadic reports from his scattered team members. They were all following his lead, abandoning standard operating procedures in favor of individual survival tactics. The approach seemed to be working, as enemy contact had decreased significantly since they stopped using predictable military movement patterns. Bravo team leader, this is Charlie team, Lieutenant Park's voice whispered through the radio. I have eyes on what appears to be an enemy command post approximately 1 kilometer southeast of my position. Multiple personnel, communications equipment, and what looks like medical facilities. The intelligence was valuable but also troubling. An enemy command post in this location suggested that the operation against his teams was being directed in real time by commanders who could observe the battlefield and adjust tactics accordingly. It also meant that the enemy had established a semi-permanent base of operations in the area, indicating long-term planning and substantial resources. Marcus continued tracking the wounded enemy sniper, noting that the man was indeed moving toward the southeast, probably seeking medical attention at the command post Lieutenant Park had identified. This created both an opportunity and a significant risk, as approaching the enemy base would put Marcus in extreme danger, while potentially providing valuable intelligence about their adversaries. The trail led through increasingly dense jungle, and Marcus realized that his quarry was taking advantage of terrain that would be difficult to navigate quickly. The wounded sniper was probably hoping to reach safety before his injury became debilitating, but the rough country was slowing his movement and creating opportunities for pursuit. As Marcus moved deeper into the forest, he began to see signs of a much larger operation than anything they had anticipated. There were multiple trails showing recent heavy use, supply caches hidden throughout the area, and communications wires strung between trees in a pattern that suggested extensive coordination between different elements of the enemy force. The scale of preparation was staggering. Viktor Kozlov had clearly invested months of planning and substantial resources in creating this elaborate trap. The question that troubled Marcus was why an arms dealer would go to such lengths to eliminate a few military teams unless there were much larger stakes involved than anyone had realized. Through a gap in the trees ahead, Marcus caught sight of what appeared to be a significant enemy installation. There were multiple structures camouflaged to blend with the natural vegetation, communications antennas, and personnel moving with the disciplined efficiency of a military unit. This was not a temporary base established for a single operation, but a permanent facility designed to support ongoing activities in the region. Marcus realized that stumbling upon this installation might be more valuable than completing their original mission. If Viktor Kozlov was operating a permanent base with military-level capabilities, it represented a threat to regional security far greater than simple arms dealing. The intelligence value of documenting this facility could justify the losses his teams had already suffered, but approaching close enough to gather meaningful intelligence would require getting past perimeter security that was certainly extensive and sophisticated. Marcus would have to use every skill he possessed to infiltrate an enemy base while wounded. Hostiles were actively hunting for him throughout the surrounding area. The wounded enemy sniper was now only a few hundred meters ahead, clearly struggling with blood loss and fatigue. Marcus faced a tactical decision that would determine both his immediate survival and the success of gathering critical intelligence about the enemy operation. He could eliminate his immediate threat or attempt to follow the man into the base itself, risking capture or death, but potentially discovering information that could save countless lives in future operations. Marcus made his decision quickly, following the wounded enemy sniper toward the hidden base while maintaining enough distance to avoid detection. The intelligence value of understanding Viktor Kozlov's true operation outweighed the personal satisfaction of eliminating his immediate adversary. Sometimes the bigger picture required accepting smaller risks to prevent larger catastrophes. The enemy installation revealed itself gradually as Marcus moved closer. What he had initially taken for a temporary command post was actually a sophisticated facility that had been under construction for months. There were underground bunkers connected by camouflage trenches, communications equipment that rivaled anything military forces possessed, and enough supplies to support operations for extended periods. Through his binoculars, Marcus counted at least 30 personnel moving around the base with the disciplined efficiency of professional soldiers. Their equipment was uniformly excellent. Their weapons were all modern military variants, and their coordination suggested extensive training and experience. This was not a criminal organization, but a private military company operating at the level of National Armed Forces. The wounded enemy sniper reached the perimeter of the base and was immediately assisted by medical personnel who had obviously been expecting his arrival. Marcus watched through his scope as the man was quickly treated and then debriefed by what appeared to be senior officers. The level of organization and professionalism was disturbing, indicating resources and connections that extended far beyond regional arms dealing. Charlie Team to Bravo Team Leader. Lieutenant Park's voice whispered through Marcus's radio earpiece. I have additional intelligence on the enemy base. There are at least 3 helicopter landing pads, multiple communications arrays, and what appears to be a substantial ammunition storage area. This is a major military installation, disguised as jungle. The confirmation of his own observations made Marcus realize that they had discovered something, potentially more significant than anyone in their command structure had anticipated. Viktor Kozlov was not simply an arms dealer, but the frontman for a sophisticated operation that posed a direct threat to government forces throughout the region. Marcus activated his camera equipment and began documenting the enemy facility from his concealed position. The photographs would provide invaluable intelligence if any of his team members survived to deliver them to higher authorities. Every detail of the base's construction, personnel, and equipment needed to be recorded for future reference and tactical planning. As he worked, Marcus noticed that the base was receiving regular communications from multiple sources. Radio operators were constantly busy, and there appeared to be coordination with other installations or mobile units throughout the area. The scope of the operation was becoming clearer, revealing a network of facilities and personnel that probably extended across international borders. Through his radio, Marcus heard Riley's voice reporting his own observations. Delta Team has eyes on supply convoys moving along secondary roads approximately 2 kilometers east of the main base. Multiple vehicles, heavy equipment, and what appears to be weapon shipments. This operation is much larger than anything we were briefed about. The intelligence picture that emerged from these reports painted a disturbing scenario. Rather than pursuing a single arms dealer, Marcus's teams had stumbled into a comprehensive intelligence and military operation that threatened the stability of multiple governments in the region. The question now was whether any of them would survive to report their discoveries. Marcus noticed increased activity around the enemy base as the afternoon progressed. Personnel were moving with greater urgency. Additional equipment was being deployed, and communications traffic appeared to be intensifying. Something significant was either beginning or ending, and the timing suggested it might be related to the morning's engagement with his teams. Through his scope, Marcus observed Viktor Kozlov himself emerging from one of the underground bunkers. The arms dealer was conferring with several military officers, studying maps and pointing toward different areas of the surrounding terrain. They appeared to be planning additional operations, possibly involving the systematic elimination of other government forces in the region. The sight of Kozlov reminded Marcus of their original mission objective, but the tactical situation made any attempt at elimination suicidal. The arms dealer was surrounded by professional security personnel in a heavily defended facility, far beyond the capabilities of a single sniper operating without support. The intelligence value of observing the operation had become more important than completing the original mission. "All stations, this is Bravo Team Leader," Marcus whispered into his radio. "Priority shift to intelligence gathering. Document everything you observe about enemy capabilities, personnel, equipment, and coordination. Mission success now depends on getting this information to higher authorities, rather than eliminating the primary target." The decision represented a fundamental change in their approach, shifting from direct action to reconnaissance and survival. Marcus realized that his teams had accidentally discovered something far more significant than they had been sent to find, making their survival and successful reporting more important than any individual tactical objective. As evening approached, Marcus observed increased helicopter activity around the enemy base. Multiple aircraft were arriving and departing, apparently bringing in additional personnel and equipment while removing other materials. The level of air traffic suggested coordination with installations beyond the immediate area, confirming the scope and sophistication of Kozlov's operation. "Charlie Team to all stations," Lieutenant Park's voice reported through the radio. "I'm observing what appears to be prisoner processing at the enemy base. At least 6 individuals in civilian clothes being held under guard. Could be captured government personnel or intelligence sources." The information about prisoners created a moral dilemma for Marcus. Military ethics demanded attempts to rescue captured friendly personnel, but the tactical reality made such efforts virtually impossible. His small scattered teams lacked the resources and support necessary to conduct rescue operations against a well-defended enemy facility. Through his binoculars, Marcus studied the prisoner area Lieutenant Park had identified. The individuals appeared to be in relatively good condition, suggesting they were being held for intelligence purposes rather than immediate elimination. This created both hope for their eventual rescue and concern about what information they might be forced to reveal under interrogation. As darkness began to fall, Marcus realized that his teams faced a critical decision point. They could attempt to extract from the area immediately, accepting the loss of the prisoners but preserving their own lives and the intelligence they had gathered. Alternatively, they could remain in the area overnight, gathering additional information while risking capture or elimination by enemy patrols. The decision was complicated by the deteriorating condition of his wounded team members. Riley was losing blood steadily and needed medical attention that wouldn't be available in the jungle. Lieutenant Park's team included 2 wounded personnel who were slowing their movement and making concealment more difficult. Every hour they remained in enemy territory increased the likelihood of casualties. Marcus studied the enemy base through his night vision. equipment as artificial lighting began to illuminate key areas of the facility. The level of infrastructure was remarkable, including what appeared to be permanent electrical generation and water treatment systems. This was not a temporary installation, but a long-term base designed to support ongoing operations for months or years. Through his radio, Marcus heard Riley's voice growing noticeably weaker. "Bravo, team leader. I'm not sure I can make it through the night without medical attention. Blood loss is significant, and I'm starting to lose consciousness periodically." The report forced Marcus to confront the reality that delay might cost him his oldest friend and most trusted team member. But premature extraction could result in the loss of intelligence that might prevent future catastrophes involving other military units. The decision required balancing immediate loyalty against larger responsibilities. "Delta Team, can you reach the emergency cache we established yesterday?" Marcus asked, referring to medical supplies they had hidden as a contingency measure. "It's not much, but there should be enough to stabilize your condition until we can arrange extraction." "Negative," Riley responded. "The cache is in enemy hands. I observed them recovering it about 2 hours ago. They have our emergency procedures and supply locations." The confirmation that their contingency plans had been compromised eliminated Marcus's last hope of supporting his wounded team members with previously positioned resources. They were completely on their own, with only the equipment they carried and the skills they possessed. The enemy's thorough preparation continued to exceed every worst-case scenario they had considered. As the hours passed, Marcus documented every detail of the enemy operation he could observe through his optical equipment. The base maintained a 24-hour operational schedule, with personnel rotating through shifts that indicated professional military discipline. Communications equipment operated continuously, suggesting CUO. Dawn broke gray and misty over the jungle, providing Marcus with the concealment he needed to begin moving his scattered teams toward safety. The enemy base showed reduced activity during the early morning hours, suggesting that their adversaries were maintaining normal operational schedules despite the previous day's engagement. This routine behavior gave Marcus hope that they could extract without triggering additional pursuit. "All stations, this is Bravo team leader," Marcus whispered into his radio. "Begin movement toward the northern extraction corridor using individual routes. Maintain radio silence except for emergencies. Rally point is the old temple ruins we identified during insertion. The temple ruins represented their best hope for a safe rally point because they weren't part of any official mission planning. Marcus had identified the location during their initial reconnaissance, but hadn't included it in any reports or communications that might have been compromised. It was a gamble based on terrain knowledge rather than standard procedures. Marcus took one final look at Viktor Kozlov's base through his binoculars, memorizing details that might be important for future operations. The facility represented a level of threat that intelligence services had completely failed to identify or assess properly. The arms dealer was clearly the front man for a sophisticated organization, with resources and connections that extended far beyond simple criminal activity. As he began his own movement toward the extraction point, Marcus reflected on how completely their mission had been compromised from the beginning. Someone with access to their planning, communications, and operational procedures had provided detailed intelligence to the enemy, turning what should have been a straightforward interdiction mission into a carefully planned ambush designed to eliminate his entire command. The jungle was quiet in the early morning hours, with only natural sounds of wildlife resuming their normal activities. Marcus moved carefully through terrain he had studied extensively during their initial insertion, using game trails and natural concealment to avoid detection by any enemy patrols that might be searching for survivors of yesterday's engagement. After 2 hours of careful movement, Marcus reached the temple ruins and was relieved to find Lieutenant Park already waiting in a concealed position. Her 2 wounded team members were in stable condition, having received basic medical attention during the night, using supplies they had improvised from jungle materials and their individual first aid kits. Charlie team reporting successful extraction, Park whispered as Marcus joined her position. "We observed enemy patrols throughout the night, but they were following predictable search patterns based on standard military procedures. They weren't expecting us to abandon normal tactics." The confirmation that their shift to unconventional methods had been successful validated Marcus's decision to break with standard operating procedures. Sometimes survival required thinking like criminals or insurgents rather than soldiers, using unpredictable methods that couldn't be anticipated by enemies who understood military doctrine. Riley arrived at the temple ruins 30 minutes later, supported by makeshift crutches he had fashioned from jungle materials. His condition was serious but stable, and he had managed to stop the bleeding, using field expedients that demonstrated the survival skills that made him such a valuable team member. Delta team present and accounted for, Riley reported with a weak but determined smile. I documented everything I could observe about enemy supply routes and communications procedures. We have enough intelligence to keep analysis teams busy for months. Marcus studied his assembled team and felt a mixture of pride and sadness. They had all survived a situation that should have been fatal, demonstrating the training and experience that made them effective special operations personnel. But they had also discovered something that would change their lives forever, making them potential targets for elimination by enemies within their own command structure. Before we discuss extraction procedures, Marcus addressed his team. Everyone needs to understand what we're facing. This isn't about completing a mission or following orders anymore. We have discovered intelligence that suggests treason at high levels of command. From this point forward, we are operating outside normal military procedures to protect both our lives and national security. The explanation was met with grim nods of understanding from his team members. They had all observed enough during the previous day to realize that something fundamental was wrong with the entire situation. The level of enemy preparation and intelligence could only have come from sources within their own military organization. Lieutenant Park produced a small digital camera that contained dozens of photographs documenting the enemy facility, personnel, and equipment. I managed to get detailed images of the base layout, communications equipment, and what appeared to be coordination with government vehicles. The evidence is comprehensive enough to support a full investigation. Riley opened his equipment pack and revealed detailed notes about enemy supply routes, communication procedures, and coordination protocols he had observed. They're operating a network that extends across multiple countries. This isn't regional arms dealing, but international military contracting with connections to intelligence services. Marcus compiled his own observations about Viktor Kozlov's role in the larger operation, the prisoner exchange he had witnessed, and the evidence of long-term base construction that indicated permanent operations rather than temporary criminal activity. The intelligence they had gathered painted a picture of threats that intelligence services had completely failed to identify. Our immediate problem is getting this information to authorities we can trust, Marcus explained to his team. Normal reporting channels have been compromised, which means we need to identify individuals or organizations outside the standard military structure who can act on what we've discovered. The decision to bypass military command represented a serious breach of protocol that could result in court-martial proceedings, but Marcus realized that following normal procedures would probably result in their deaths and the suppression of critical intelligence. Sometimes protecting national security required violating military regulations. As they prepared to move toward their final extraction point, Marcus thought about his daughter Emma and the birthday party he was determined to attend. The mission had failed in its original objectives but had succeeded in discovering something far more significant than anyone had anticipated. The question now was whether they could survive long enough to deliver their intelligence to people who could act on it effectively. 3 months later, Marcus sat in a secure briefing room in Washington, D.C., watching as intelligence analysts presented evidence that had led to the exposure of a comprehensive espionage network involving multiple government agencies. Viktor Kozlov had been captured during a joint operation that dismantled his entire organization, and several high-ranking officials had been arrested for treason. The intelligence you provided led directly to the prevention of additional attacks on military units throughout Southeast Asia, the briefing officer explained. Your decision to operate outside normal channels probably saved hundreds of lives and prevented a significant intelligence disaster. Marcus smiled as he thought about Emma's birthday party the previous weekend, where he had finally been able to keep his promise to be present for important family occasions. Sometimes the most important victories came from knowing when to break the rules rather than following them blindly. The sniper who had emerged from the riverbank had taught him that survival often depended on thinking differently than the enemy expected.